Love and light, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of El Podcast, the greatest virtual happy hour in the world. I'm your host, Kai Primo, and joined by my fellow edutainer, El Capitan Jesse Wright. Our guest today is Giovanni Mendez, Esquire. He is a tax, corporate, and blockchain attorney at GeoTax in Puerto Rico. Highly recommended, and he's known to be one of the best in this field. So thank you for being here, and thank you for letting us hang out in your office here in Santurce. It's neat to be on location.
Thank you for the invite, and welcome to the space.
It's happy hour. We want to give a shout out to Ocean Labs, our favorite brewery out here in Puerto Rico, and we're all drinking the Ocean Labs IPA. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Happy hour.
So we're frequent visitors. Just give them a shout out.
Yeah, and I love that it says Isla Verde PR in the bottle. What is up with the Star Wars obsession over here? You got Star Wars everywhere.
Yeah, there's a few recurring things in decorations. Star Wars is probably the most predominant. Got a few race things, and then Don Quixote. It's just identity. I started in this space within this office, wasn't entirely mine. So I had a smaller space within this office. And, you always try to make the space your own, no matter the size. And, as that grew, we kept on bringing more memorabilia. And then my assistant here, we redid this office, we did the glass, and I took the bigger office. She took everything, brought some additional Star Wars stuff, and just made it awesome. Yeah, I'm obviously a fan. If you go into my office, you'll see there's a few more, Star Wars things, including a container that's a helmet for a stormtrooper, but it has a pitorro inside.
What's pitorro now?
Oh, pitorro? That's like a Puerto Rican moonshine.
Oh, snap.
Oh, really? I'd love to try that. I never heard of this.
Yeah, it's called like Troncaña.
Oh, wow.
Is the other one, so.
That's awesome.
When is the proper time to take a shot of that?
Of the year or the day? Of the year, it's very predominant around Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
Christmas season, New Year's, you'll see like Puerto Ricans like pitorro. And like if you do a coquito, which is not eggnog, and I hate the comparison to eggnog, but it's the way you kind of like equate it. You're like, yeah, it's our version of eggnog, but it's not. It's coconut based. But if you do it right, you do it with pitorro. So yeah,
pitorro. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Pitorro?
Yeah, you'd say pitorro or Roncaña, which is cane rum. And by the way, the one we have is artisanal, so that's not how we get to keep it here.
Yeah, it's quite awesome. I'll definitely sample that.
Yeah,
we have to, and you have it in a Star Wars.
Oh yeah, it's in a Star Wars. Yeah, that's how we got there, right?
Hilarious.
It was a Star Wars. See,
yeah,
kind of all connects. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we are here in Santurce, which is kind of an up and coming, little area here in San Juan. Talk about what Santurce looked like, say, 12 years ago.
It's been up and coming for decades, actually. Specifically, I would say just over 10 years ago was the last time it was up and coming until it paused. And you would see developments happening and properties that were just abandoned being completed. And then that stopped with the economic crisis, right? Same as many other things. But to the far edge of Santurce, towards the east of this office, you have like the Ciudadela development, which was a very interesting development because they had stopped. The project, the ambition, everything had stopped. And around 2012, 2013, Nick Prouty and one of his partners, they're one of the first recipients of an Act 22 decree. And their company of an Export Service Act 20 decree, they see Ciudadela and the potential in it. And, they decide to complete that project. And it was about 2.5 completed towers when they acquired it. And they're up to 15 towers within the whole. And I don't know how familiar you are with the Ciudadela development, but it's mainly mid-income housing, apartments, maybe averaging 1,200 square feet. And at the time, the prices started around 160K. So it was very accessible. And their main financer was this company called SunWest. Kind of a similar story. The owners of SunWest, they moved to Puerto Rico under the incentives individually, and they ended up setting up the headquarters for SunWest all across the U.S. here in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
So kind of that put together led to that development. And that's just, one example. And then all over Santurce, you've seen things like that flourish, and the restaurant scene's obviously gotten a lot better. Local chefs have opened up some pretty cool spaces.
The artists are coming in.
Yep.
It's bringing this energy into it. Yeah.
Yep. Santurce Pub has a space right next door, which houses it's like a maker space for artists, books, etc. And then Santurce has always had that culture. It's not that something that's changed. It's something that just flourishes. Years ago, there used to be a street art festival that was done around Santurce. So, Santurce has always been the arts district. Now, there were like two far edges of Santurce, the Miramar side, and then that east side. And where we're at was kind of like the shady, darker spot. Mm. But everything's just come together. And there's still some abandoned spaces, even around here. There's abandoned buildings that have been abandoned forever. But you see some of them that are like, they're painting up that space, redeveloping that space somehow. So
it's shifting at the feel.
It's getting a lot better. Yeah.
That's so cool. Well, it's great to be on this location. It's great to be here. So thank you again. But let's get into it. But first, if you're not subscribed on YouTube and on Spotify, please subscribe and follow so you never miss a happy hour. And thank you guys. We appreciate you for supporting Gio. So let's start this. Tell us about yourself and your experience in Puerto Rico as a tax attorney.
Yep. So, I'm raised in Puerto Rico. I was born in New York, like many Puerto Ricans, out on Long Island. But I grew up here and lived here, as a kid. Went to public school in Aguada. That's my hometown. Went to undergrad in UPR at Mayagüez, Colegio, how we would call it. And then did law school also in Puerto Rico, Inter-American University. As I was going to school, even at undergrad, I had some experience with accounting and tax. I did some work for Johnson & Johnson in their finance department, and then for a local auditing firm. So, I had a taking to the business side and tax aspect of things. So when I started practicing law, I was focusing on that. And then after some years of working for other firms and other persons, had some great experience, I decided to break out on my own and start GeoTax. The beginning was myself and one part-time law student who now is an attorney and still works for us here. Now we have not so huge staff, right? A team of about 8 persons, but, pretty nice team I'm proud of. What we've been able to build in about 4 years.
Continuing on the conversations that we've had about Puerto Rico tax incentives and, Act 22, Act 60, obviously Puerto Rico has incredible and very attractive incentives in place. Just an overview, can you give an overview of other places that has a tax incentive like Puerto Rico?
It depends how you look at it. If we're talking about other places that have tax incentives, I wouldn't even know them by heart, because if you really pay attention, if we're thinking about states, most states have some sort of tax incentive or will continuously award tax incentives. You think of Atlanta and how Marvel, like pretty much every Marvel movie or show or anything, it lives out of Atlanta. And they stole that from places like New York by awarding Marvel immense tax credits. So, the film industry is one that has many states that compete for films being produced in those jurisdictions. And you see that from state to state. There's huge competition on that end. And then not to mention at the federal level, the United States itself offers many programs that awards tax incentives and tax credits. So, and then around the world, you have Ireland, Scotland, and many other jurisdictions throughout just major cities or developing countries that have some sort of tax incentive. Puerto Rico's tax incentives are unique to U.S. citizens in particular because they allow U.S. citizens like myself to reside within the U.S., not renounce your passport, and maintain all the benefits of being a U.S. citizen while not being subject to federal taxation, right? That's where it all starts. The federal tax system is based on taxation with representation, right? You've probably heard of that, or we've heard of that. We
Since
hear,
the Boston Tea Party
we
days.
hear but normally we hear the phrase kind of backwards. It's like, oh, there's no taxation without representation, but historians argue that it was actually the other way. It was the revolutionists said there will be no representation without taxation, because basically they're saying we're still going to impose taxes. It's just that we're going to impose and collect them ourselves. We're not going to give that to the king. So, but anyways, that's where this all starts. And at Puerto Rico, as well as other possessions and territories, since we don't have representation, then the federal government kind of respects that barrier that they set to themselves as, we won't tax you. So that's where the incentive starts. And then that's combined with what local jurisdictions want to do and how they want to tax types of income that are within that jurisdiction. So in that case, most similar is the USVI. They have their economic development program. It's been around for decades. It's been in
60s, 70s, or
yes. Puerto Rico has had its evolution of tax incentive also since the 70s. So it's not that they've had the incentives for longer, but they have had their incentives in their current form for longer. Because Puerto Rico has had incentives since about the 70s as well, right? It's just that we've changed them from time to time, and some of them, if you look at it, it's pretty much the same, or it's a variation or iteration. But their economic development program, in its current form, probably goes back to the 90s. And then they added something called Research and Technology Park, I would say probably a decade ago as well.
Can you describe the economy of Puerto Rico, kind of a history of the economy of Puerto Rico? It's a long one.
Yeah, it's a long, but I don't, because I don't want to skip anything I wouldn't want to skip anything that's important, but I guess I'd have to, because if not, we'll be here forever. But
yeah,
let's say, obviously, we were an agriculture economy for the most predominant time in our history. And then around 1970s, because of the Cold War, when we were already part of the U.S. needed a manufacturing hub to compete with Cuba. So they create this tax incentive called what we know as Section 936 of the U.S. Code. And they say Puerto Rico is going to be our manufacturing hub. And there was different things that were manufactured here, glass, paper, some things that are not manufactured anymore. But out of those, potentially technology and the pharma industry were the ones that have lasted the most and outlasted the repeal of the 936 incentives in the 90s. So when that came around, obviously we were very manufacturing powerhouse, manufacturing hub. Even currently, around 40% of Puerto Rico's tax revenue comes from the manufacturing industry. Puerto Rico's a spectacular place. It's a beautiful island to visit, to live in, and a lot of people think, Puerto Rico and vacations, but just about 7% of Puerto Rico's economy is dependent on tourism. So it's very, very small. We're not really set up to be a tourism economy, and that would be very difficult to develop, because there's, as we've seen, there's not the will or it seems like people don't want basically hotel rooms to be built, right? And there's other jurisdictions that continuously have hotel rooms being built around certain desirable areas, and that doesn't seem to be where we're headed. So getting from 7% tourism economy to more, to a point where we could maybe substitute the manufacturing economy doesn't seem so. So again, even more than 15 years since 936 was repealed in 1996, but it outlasted until 2006. There was a 10-year phase out, and we can talk about 936 a little more. But now, 16 years even after that, we're still dependent on manufacturing and the manufacturing economy.
For people that may be looking to relocate, there's 9 states that have no taxes or low taxes. Florida, Texas are probably the 2 most popular that come to mind. But for someone that's thinking of relocating and maybe hasn't heard of Act 60, why should they move to Puerto Rico? Is Puerto Rico an option for them? And kind of what is a broad overview that would be more enticing than, say, living in Florida or living in Texas or one of the other 7 states that have low or no income taxes?
Florida's flat.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
It's geographically flat.
Geographically, there's no El Yunque.
There's nothing to look at.
There's no El Yunque. El Yunque.
Yeah, I think so. I say that because it's actually where that starts. People moving to Puerto Rico, and you get like the back and forth of why or why not. You have to like it. You have to be looking for what Puerto Rico has to offer. You have to understand where we're situated, what we are, what Puerto Rico is. It's an island. It's an island with the best infrastructure in the Caribbean, but we're still an island in the Caribbean, right? So if you're living in Florida, there could be advantages to moving to Florida. Nevada is one of those other states, Texas. But I think Puerto Rico just culturally and just naturally has a lot of things to offer. And then again, for some people it doesn't. It's not for everyone. And I've seen it. I've had the conversations again and again and again. A person wants to move, the spouse maybe doesn't, or a person moves and doesn't like it, or a person moves and automatically loves it. So that's the first thing. And then aside from that, if you're looking at it from the economic standpoint and tax incentives, residing in Puerto Rico allows you to not pay federal tax on income from Puerto Rico. So that's automatically a huge saving there. Federal tax could go as high as 37.5%. The brackets were recently adjusted for inflation, and it was a very generous adjustment, but nonetheless can be a very high tax bracket. Puerto Rico's highest tax bracket for ordinary income is 33%, but then there are incentives for exportation of services, or for example, capital gains, where you pay no tax on capital gains accrued and realized upon your move to Puerto Rico, and 2 to 4% tax on income that is for the exportation of services, meaning you bring in new money to the island. If you bring in new money to circulation in the island, then you get this tax incentive for business.
Why does Puerto Rico need new money?
Because every community or jurisdiction will need new money. I went to a conference in Howard University, and I didn't know this at the time or where I was or understand, but Howard University is a predominantly African-American university in Washington, D.C. They're very focused on this. It was a very enlightening experience, and we were invited there because they consider us part of them and their history, et cetera. And as they're talking about economic development, they're graphing out a Jewish family. Each new dollar in a Jewish family remains in circulation for 3 weeks. Asian family, 2 weeks. And then they said African-American family, less than a day, right? And that's in part based. It's not really because the African-American family or the community just wants to spend the money. It's just because they need that money, because when you get your paycheck, you probably already need to pay something. And the way you change that is by bringing more money into circulation. So that's why Puerto Rico needs new money in circulation, right? We want that money here. You have an export service company, for example, bring new money into circulation. That will create jobs. That will create indirect expenses, and that will create direct and indirect tax revenue as well. So that's the reason why every export incentive, not just export services, but for example, manufacturing, is so important, because they directly bring this additional money flow and cash flow into the island and into circulation.
Can you define Act 20, 22, and Act 60?
Yep. So basically, again, Puerto Rico has had tax incentives for more than 50 years. And it all started, you could say, federally in Section 936, locally, the Industrial Incentives Acts. And then we had the International Banking Incentive Act. So it got to a point where there was about 15 major incentives. Act 20 comes from Act 73. Act 73 is an evolution of Act 135. And Act 73 is the Manufacturing Incentives Act. Back in 2008 and prior, if you had an export service company, you would go and request a Manufacturing Incentive Act. And even if you weren't necessarily manufacturing, you're providing services, you would get a Manufacturing Incentives Act. So in 2012, they say, let's break these apart. And they create Act 20. And they wanted to break them apart because they thought it was easier to explain. It's like, no, you don't have to have a manufacturing operation. You can export your service. You can export professional services. So it wasn't new. It was just carved out. The new one was Act 22 back then. And Act 22 says if you are a person who's an investor and becomes a resident of Puerto Rico under a certain set of rules, then you won't pay any capital gains tax until the year 2035 for anything that you accrue and realize after moving to Puerto Rico. Act 20 is the Export Service Act, 4% tax. Act 73 is the Manufacturing Incentives Act, 4% tax on what you manufacture from Puerto Rico. And then you have film, agriculture, young entrepreneurs, which is a newer one. You have many, many incentives. So in 2019, they said, we have too many of these. We don't really understand like what the ROI of these are, or it's hard to track. So they wanted to do one simple act, well, not simple, but one single act that captured them all, and then you would apply for those incentives under a certain chapter. So Act 60 does tweak the benefits and requirements somewhat. It reduces, some of the benefits that existed back then, but I think it becomes nominal when you're getting such a good incentive, and just has it in one code that should be easier to follow and interpret.
So Act 60 basically bundled a bunch of separate acts together.
Every incentive
one package known as Act 60.
Yes,
right.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And can you kind of alluded to it in your previous explanation, but can you talk about what it means to have sourced income in Puerto Rico sourced income?
Yeah, I mean, that could become very technical, but it's basically the requirement that the work needs to be performed from here. There needs to be active roles and active functions that create substance to the work being performed here. And that will create Puerto Rico sourced income because, I guess there could be the confusion. And I get these questions sometimes, depends on how educated the person is who's asking these questions. They think, oh, maybe I'll form a company in Puerto Rico, and just because I formed a company there, then I'll get some sort of incentive. And, you told them, no, just not how that works. You either move yourself as an individual, or even if you don't, you'll have to set up a team there and you'll have different consequences. Think about big corporations where the owners of the big corporations, they reside all over the world, but those big corporations still operate here and generate Puerto Rico sourced income. It's because it needs to be actively generated here in the case of ordinary income. And in the case of things like capital gains, then it's the matter of them being accrued and realized post move.
We saw you at a Crypto Mondays here in Puerto Rico. Crypto Mondays, Puerto Rico, a little shout out there. But you mentioned that there were specific provisions in Act 60 that help promote the development of blockchain and cryptocurrencies. Can you kind of talk about those?
When Act 60 was approved, basically it clarified in the case of capital gains that this term other assets would include cryptocurrencies. Very clear that the Puerto Rico government wanted to include the sale or trading of crypto assets and capital gains generated by them in the individual investor portion of Act 60. And then in the case of the export services portion, they also specifically included, under distribution of computer programs, they included, blockchain technologies and fees or commissions generated through the use of blockchain technologies. So it's not something that was necessarily impossible prior to the improvement of Act 60, because the service or the spirit of an export service was still there. It's just that it was actually picked up and defined by the Puerto Rico government back then, which I saw as a great sign in a time where blockchain industries in general have regulatory uncertainty and what people call the big boys, right? Or just institutional parties want to come into the industry. They need guidance. If you have a big company that's publicly traded company or regulated industry or someone that has fiduciary right to investors, they can't act on whims or interpretations. They need certainty. Puerto Rico took, I think, a very good step just in defining those and including them as part of the Incentives Acts in Act 60.
Right.
What have been the effects on the economy of Puerto Rico since the inception of Act 20 and 22 over a decade ago?
Yeah, so you could get data points in different areas over what the effects have been. But no matter where you gather your data from necessarily, you see that the benefit, there's a net benefit of these incentives. Act 22 investors alone, which technically come and the incentive said they don't pay tax on their capital gains. So people presume, oh, you're not paying tax. Well, Act 22 investors alone pay close to $90 million a year in taxes in Puerto Rico. So, an individual investor that's coming to allegedly not pay tax, and, as a whole, this group pays about $90 million in tax, then you see a net benefit there. The real estate industry has seen certainly a benefit that's over $2 billion in real estate transactions. And, out of those, you obviously get capital gains that go to, if it's a local selling a property, capital gains that go there. And you have also realtor and broker commissions, and you have notary fees, realtor commissions being on average 6% of the transaction, notary fees being on average 1% of the transaction, and the stamps paid to the Puerto Rican government to register a deed and a mortgage will be about 1% of that transaction as well. So, you're talking over 200 million collected to the government in these real estate transactions. And you're talking a lot more than that for another 200 million for the notaries in these real estate transactions, et cetera. So those are certain numbers on the impact. Job-wise, about 40,000 jobs have been created based on the information. And there's several reports that have different conclusions, and by economists, and it's commissioned by the government. And some will say, oh, it's a bad conclusion, and some will have a positive conclusion, but the numbers repeat themselves. It's 40,000 jobs created, and one economist, his last name is Cueto, he said, these incentives failed. But when you look into it, it's like, well, 40,000 jobs created, but that wasn't enough, is kind of what they conclude. Well, what bar are you holding it against to say if it did fail or not, right? Who says 40,000 was enough?
I think that's really only, under 5,000 people that have moved here through gotten these decrees.
Yeah, I would say it's less than that. It's actually about 3,000 at most, because you have, if you go by applications, you'll have over 4,000 applications. But if you look at what happens, many people submit an application because it's a $750 filing fee to submit an application with the government, and they'll just, oh yeah, it looks like a good idea, I'll apply. And then when it's time to move, they're like, no, my reality, I'm not really going to move, or again,
but they don't follow through.
Yeah, no, many people.
So it's maybe less than that.
Many people don't follow through, and then there's other people that do move and move a year after, 2 years after, etc.
So what's your best estimate then of how many Act 60 decree holders are actually currently on the island? You'd say it's around 3,000?
Yeah, I would say around 3,000 with some margin of error. And that margin of error, I would say it should go to lower than higher, actually.
Right, probably. So maybe like 2,800 and
yeah, potentially. Yeah, because when you see markets, go all the way up. You have years like 2017, 2018, 2020, and 2021. A lot of people they're making money, and they're like, oh, let me do this now. And then they realize, no, it's not something that, it's not in their reality anymore to do.
Yeah.
So that's why you see a lot of applications come in.
When you
but 40,000 jobs, going back to the 40,000 jobs and that many decrees, that's pretty good numbers to me, no?
Yeah. Let me. I'm going to pull up some other numbers here to see what's relevant.
Oh, yeah, numbers are good.
Yeah. Salaries paid to Act 20 employees are on average 5 times higher than the average salary in Puerto Rico. You have that between 2015 and 2020, the salaries paid to employees of Act 20 companies, it grew by 130 million between 2015 and 2020. When you add that to the ones that were previously created, it's about 650 million in salaries paid by companies with Act 20 decrees.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
Wow, so you're talking almost $750 million.
Yep.
And that's annually.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And then you have skilled workers, because I know a lot of times it's a question like what type of employment is being hired, and skilled workers were hired 4.7 more.
And can you
4.7 times more than previous to these decrees.
Right. And what's like the primary skill that they're actually being employed in?
Yeah.
Do you know?
I don't have that data set right now specifically. If I would go, by what I know a lot of like probably project managers and developers is what companies would look for.
Right.
I'm aware of law firms that hire hundreds of employees each, but that's kind of.
And when you talked about that $90 million Act 60 holders are paying $90 million in taxes.
That's Act 22 alone. Not Act 60 in general.
Okay.
That's an interesting number because it's Act 22 alone, which is the individual investor who's not supposed to be paying tax. That's not including the 4% tax paid by export service companies or manufacturing industries.
Right. So what percentage, if you had to kind of use your expertise, what percentage of Act 2022 and Act 60 holders, what percentage of the total tax bill are they actually paying then? I mean,
I think it's low. Puerto Rico's budget it's a $30 billion
budget. So it's a $30 billion budget. Okay. Yeah.
So it's not, we're saying these numbers and I mean, they are great numbers, but on the other hand, if you hold the incentives to be the savior of Puerto Rico, they're always going to fail, right? Because Puerto Rico has a $30 billion budget.
Right.
And then, so $100 million in extra tax revenue by people that are not supposed to pay tax is a lot because they're not supposed to pay tax, but it's not going to.
Right. But if you're talking about less than 3,000 people, though, that's a huge chunk of money considering the.
It is. No, that's what I'm saying. It's a huge chunk of money if you look at specifically the group that's generating it. And then to that, you add on the jobs created and the 4% paid by the companies, especially in Puerto Rico, where if you look at over $100,000 filers, you maybe have 1,000 people that filed with income over $100,000 salaries, and that was before the acts. So Puerto Rico doesn't have high income earners, right? We know that. So the tax base in Puerto Rico isn't actually huge from income tax. So this adds to the income tax. But on the other hand, we can't the measurement or the benchmark to say if it is good or if it fails, can't be, it transformed, Puerto Rico's tax collection, because again, we're talking about a $30 billion budget in Puerto Rico. If you look at, for example, what Puerto Ricans reported in capital gains, Puerto Ricans paid maybe just over $100 million in capital gains. So Puerto Ricans that don't have a decree, I should say, because there's many Puerto Ricans that do have and qualify the individual investor decree. But so right now, the taxes in general paid by Act 22 decree holders almost match the capital gain taxes paid by Puerto Ricans that don't have an Act 22 decree.
Wow.
And that's what I think we should look at more. And that's what I think we have failed to see, because if I was in government back then, I would have said, we're going to give these tax incentives to basically it's people, newcomers to Puerto Rico. And right now it's people that didn't live in Puerto Rico between 2007 and 2012. So, if you had a person that lived in Puerto Rico their whole life, left in 2006 when our economic crisis started, and now is doing well and wants to come back, they can come back under the program, right? So that's something very important to understand. But if back then we said, we're going to bring in new people, and when these new people bring in $100 million in new tax revenue, we're going to give the same incentive to everybody in Puerto Rico, and we're going to eliminate or reduce our capital gain tax. That's what we should have been looking at, because right now we'd be very close to those numbers. And I think something we could still do. These programs are constantly looked at. When the programs are criticized, one of the things that's criticized is, it doesn't qualify for local Puerto Ricans won't qualify. Well, that's not exactly true, because out of the many incentives, only one has a restriction. That's a short restriction of residency, right, between 2007 and 2012. But let's say, even when you take that point, instead of saying, just do without the incentives in general, we should be thinking, no, how do we give incentives to more people? And one of them is looking at the increased tax revenue.
Do you have any numbers on how many Puerto Ricans have moved back back and actually have qualified for Act 60?
I don't have those numbers, but the export service decrees, I think about 35% of export service decrees issued have been issued to local Puerto Rican companies.
So a little over a third. That's
just over a third of export service companies. So there's definitely a group of Puerto Ricans that benefit from, and then again, some will benefit from capital gains as well, and others would only benefit from export service, for example, or manufacturing.
And when you mentioned that Puerto Rico has a $30 billion budget, where does the bulk of that money come from then?
I mean, that's the consolidated budget, including including things that are paid by the federal government. Puerto Rico's tax revenues, I'll be wrong, I haven't looked at. The audited financial statements of Puerto Rico stopped being issued for quite some while, and now they're kind of issuing them all at the same time.
Okay.
I like to look at these, but I haven't, and I think they're up to date already, and if not, they're very close to being up to date. But I'm going to just use older numbers. Around 9-10 million is tax revenue, but most of that will come from sales and use tax.
So how much comes from of that 30 billion, how much comes from the federal government?
About half.
About 15 billion is...
Yeah.
And then who... Of the 15 billion coming from the federal government, who's paying that bill, or where is that coming from?
I mean, there's that's a whole other conversation, because basically just those are distributions that are supposed to go to U.S. citizens, and there goes the debate of the federal government does that for every state, right? It's not that Puerto Rico's receiving, except for like when we specifically have like FEMA money or something,
right? Hurricane Maria,
but
or something like that.
Just think of healthcare funds, etc. Like every state will get distributions for healthcare funds or for roads, or it's just things that the federal government will take care of for every state and territories. It's just that in the case of Puerto Rico and other territories, we don't get the exact matching, or we don't get the pro rata amount that a state gets.
So you get Puerto Rico being a Commonwealth territory gets a lower percentage for its population, or however the formula works.
Yeah, the formula is not the formula, right? It's okay, how much do we want to carve out to the territories' possessions? Yeah.
So like Guam would be in the same.
Every possession or territory will get distributions of federal funding. That's just how the federal government works.
But it wouldn't be the same or equal. It would be.
It's not the same as necessarily. Yeah, it's not the same formula as a state necessarily. For some things, possessions will be included. For others, not. And
I'd be curious to know how it's all calculated and how it goes to the
census.
The census. Okay.
Yeah, it's the census data. So based on census data is the distribution of federal funding. So that's why I say it's very important to fill the census, and some people won't. So the census in Puerto Rico is really estimated. They're currently doing adjustments now to census data, and that's kind of how we know where Puerto Rico's population is or should be. Estimated 3.1 million currently. So it's based on the census.
I apologize. I've been skipping some census applications.
Yeah, I mean,
when I lived in California, of course they're important.
But you either get lazy and don't want to do it, or then there's like these other arguments to why you don't want to, or people don't want to fill the census, right?
Get that, everybody, fill out your census.
fill out your census. Yeah,
it's important. There's like a few million right there that.
Absolutely.
Skip out on paying.
Well, Puerto Rico would get more funding for roads if we increased our drinking age to 21.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right,
Talk about that.
The drinking age in Puerto Rico is 18, which is, I think, why it's a popular spot for spring breakers and university in the mainland.
And we miss out on a few billion in government funding if we would raise our drinking age.
Yeah, can you explain the reason?
Can you explain why?
Yeah, can you explain why?
The government said so. It's just because of that.
It's some weird rule
it's in the
that
law.
They said.
Yeah.
Make it 21 and make more money.
I'm originally from Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a big drinking state along with Puerto Rico. And Wisconsin, I believe, was the last state to lower their DUI to 0.08. When I was younger, it was 0.1. And they were like, no, we're not going to change it to 0.08. But then the federal government's like, okay, fine. Then you just won't get as much federal funding.
Yeah, you don't get. Yeah. It's just that establish whatever the safety barriers are.
So, but how come Puerto Rico hasn't increased it? If they could use the road money. I mean, those potholes are gnarly.
They've gotten better. They've gotten a lot better. I think it's culturally it'd be impossible.
Oh, people would protest. We would get straight to the streets.
Yeah, I think you don't want to mess with Puerto Rican
Maybe
Christmas.
Like, si puede. Yes, we can drink when I turn 18.
So switching topics a little bit, but Miami and Austin, Texas are both kind of known as crypto hotspots. Some people I've heard refer to Puerto Rico as the Silicon Valley of blockchain and crypto. And I see that you're a blockchain strategist and attorney. I mean, what does that entail, and what makes Puerto Rico attractive for that space? Crypto, blockchain, NFTs.
I think that question, the answer to that question has evolved. And just being blunt, originally a lot of the people that moved here in the crypto scene was because of the tax incentives. You had a mass of people that were starting new crypto projects or simply had held or were planning to continue to hold crypto assets. And as the IRS issues limited guidance, but has issued limited guidance on the treatment of crypto, they realized, well, I have to pay tax on this. What's my best plan? And either renouncing citizenship or, hey, let's move to Puerto Rico. And I think that was kind of the answer 6 years ago, maybe. But more recently, it's because there's so many people in the crypto space here, then it becomes a hub where creators that aren't necessarily wealthy and want to create a project and want access to the knowledge or the capital or the connections, they're like, I need to go to Puerto Rico. I need to go to, that's where it is. And that's what Miami's tried to become, especially, the last 2 years. But Puerto Rico got a head start to that. Miami has had other advantages, and they're probably growing to more of a hub in that sense. But certainly, it started with the tax incentive, but then it become because of the knowledge was here.
Right. So kind of they originally came out for the tax incentives, and then it just kind of created this natural snowball where people were attracted to the talent because they were out here building stuff.
And that goes to the point of when we measure the success of the tax incentives, the statement of motives for Act 22 says that one of the things it wants to bring is know-how. It wants to bring just a new type of economy. And that's a success that you don't see in any report, but you do see how Puerto Rico's, like entrepreneurial mindset in younger crowds has changed. How, you mentioned Crypto Mondays and other gatherings, where it used to be just the gringo. And now these crowds are like 50-50, right? And there's integration, and that's how you get locals to network and build businesses or get employed by meeting these people. And one of the true successes that you can measure and was part of what we were aiming for.
The original vision, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And that's slow in the beginning. And so there's even the kind of backlash of these acts. I think it's just a lack of education that, but it is working.
Yeah.
It just takes a little bit of time.
Puerto Rico's tax system is so complex that when it's hard to understand what the tax system is in general, then you start talking about incentives and you're like, wait, what? It just gets confusing. And that's because every time we have a tax reform, you hear tax reform, you think everything changes. Well, not exactly. We're still in 2022, we're still using regulations from the 1994 reform. So there's been 3 reforms since then where the law has quote unquote changed entirely, but the regs are not up to date. So us as professionals, we have to go back to, well, what they say in 94. Okay, is there something new? There may be for this bit or that bit, or not. And then we had tax reform in 2011. Mm-hmm. That's where a tax was imposed to the manufacturing companies that were here, is like a 4% surtax. And they're like, this is so complicated that we're not going to, when they change that, we're not going to change this section. We're going to leave the definition as it is. And you would get a new law that says, well, this is going to be defined as it was in 94, or in 16, this is going to be defined like it was defined in 2011. So it's so complex. We have sales tax, excise tax. We have sales tax that behaves like a VAT tax, but we also have income tax and property tax and construction tax. We have all these taxes that individual in Puerto Rico would have to understand, a business owner in Puerto Rico would have to understand, and can barely understand. And then like, oh yeah, and then there's like 15 tax incentives. Like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what I need to do in the first place. So that's what makes it so complicated. So when you're talking about benefits, again, it's hard to explain either the benefits for you as an individual or a business person to take advantage of, or as the results, because it's just hard to get.
Yeah, I mean, I remember I was watching you on the Crypto Monday when I was preparing for this, and I saw that I believe Michael Turpin asked you about, I think it was a 10% tax on inventory, an inventory tax.
Mm-hmm.
It's 8, yeah.
Computer. Is
Right.
it 8 or 10?
Yeah. So it's 8. That's the property tax. So we have property tax here, and the Chamber of Commerce, among other organizations, but they've led the charge in saying, look, when we had the hurricane, one of the problems here is that, warehouses or stores, they purposely keep their inventory low towards the end of the year, because if they have inventory here on December 31st, they'll pay 8% tax on it.
Mm-hmm.
So they'd rather remove that inventory. So if we eliminate that tax at once, then you won't have that problem. Stores will have as much inventory as they want to store locally in Puerto Rico. But then that gets into, everybody can agree with that, but then municipalities run their budgets based on this property tax.
Interesting.
So they'll, even if the tax is collected or not, sometimes they even get financing based on tax that they're collecting in the future. So some municipalities are pretty much mortgaged into what they'll collect from municipal taxes like property tax. So it's what makes it very complicated. And that's the same reason sometimes we see like empty buildings. Like, I wish somebody would do something with that building. And when you go look at it, it's like, no, they haven't paid the property tax for 10 years. So they don't get foreclosed on the property. So the owner just keeps it, and it's just accruing the property tax, 8% property tax. The municipalities won't really be in favor, because even when the tax is not collected, they get financing based on the tax they would have collected, right? So the municipality gets the money anyway. So it's just one of those things that exist. You mentioned Florida earlier. Yeah, Florida doesn't have an income tax because they base their economy on the property tax, right? They have one system. Puerto Rico just has them all, right? Again, we have income tax, property tax, sales tax, excise tax. Our sales tax behaves like a VAT tax because it's paid in the port. So it's just all these things that we have, and we've never had a ground zero reform and say, okay, we're going to figure this out. We're just going to have one tax system.
Yeah. I mean, I
So
think
if you were the guy who were in charge of reform, what would you change?
I think you lower the brackets and broaden the base. So if you want not just wealthy individuals, right, but you just want people in general to relocate to your jurisdiction, and you want businesses to relocate, you just need something that makes sense, right? So you simplify the tax system as much as possible, and then you lower the brackets, because if you disincentivize people to try to go around the system, if the system is clear and it's a low barrier. So I like the income tax system. I've seen hard arguments to where the property tax system is better. I don't know if Puerto Rico is ready for that though, because of poverty line, people living below the poverty line. You really need exemptions on property taxes, right? Which is not talked about, right? In Florida, you get homestead. Your homestead exemption means part of your home will be tax-free, but you're never going to be tax-free property tax-wise if you own property in Florida, for example. So that's what I think, because of the poverty line. I think you just lower tax brackets, finding what that spot would be. I don't know, 10% across the board or something. I don't have those numbers. You need numbers to figure it out. But I think this 33% individual on a pretty low bracket at this point, 61,500, is pretty low. And I've heard the current secretary, that bracket was supposed to go to, the highest bracket was supposed to go to 29%. at 125K. So it reduced the highest bracket by 4%, and it pretty much doubled where you would fall in the highest bracket. That was a pretty interesting reform, but it only lasted 3 years because government changed and new guy, new governor, new secretary, new reform.
Yeah, it seems like it's always changing. Like
it changes,
like a lot of trial and error. Let's test something, and then if it doesn't work, change
pretty
it.
much because even sales tax started. We're not 20 years into sales tax, but 15 years probably more. It's not the same sales tax we used to pay now. The system changed.
What was it before?
First of all, it was 7%. And second, when they included it, they eliminated the excise tax for most items. They left it for some items like cars and certain other items. But you would just pay it at the point of sale. Now it behaves more like a VAT. And if you really look at it, if it's paid at the port, there's always going to be a markup because there's a cost to the wholesaler and the distributor, right? So we end up paying more and the rate is 11.5 now, and it's higher effectively because it works like a VAT tax.
Yeah.
How does the Jones Act factor into all the various like taxes and things on the island? I hear everyone always talk about the Jones Act, saying that's the reason Puerto Rico and Hawaii are so expensive. Certain more, I guess you could say, merchandise.
Not just possessions, right? It basically says if you're a foreign ship, you can't make more than one stop in U.S. ports, or rather, you can't unload and load if you're a foreign ship. And obviously, since Hawaii and Puerto Rico are islands, well, then if you go, let's say, to Florida first, you could unload and then bring a half-empty ship to Puerto Rico. If you want to bring goods into Puerto Rico, you can't. So that's what the act says, and basically it limits competition. It's interesting because there's about a dozen U.S. flagged companies that could come to Puerto Rico, and only 3 do.
Like when I lived in Hawaii, the Hawaiians would use the example: if you grew a pineapple on, say, Maui, and you wanted to ship it to Honolulu, where most of the Hawaiians live, or the population lives, you'd have to ship it to L.A. and then Maui to L.A. and then L.A. to Honolulu.
Because the issue is having a foreign ship unload and load, right? So if you use an American, the problem is that where the real problem comes big shipping companies, part of the logistics is they never want the ship to be empty, so they count on loading and reloading, right?
Right.
So when you can't do that out of Puerto Rico, or Puerto Rico doesn't generate enough to reload the ship, then they probably want to make more than one stop, especially since we eliminated, or not, we didn't eliminate, the federal government eliminated Section 936, and our manufacturing went down so much because it used, maybe before you'd say, okay, we would have ships that would be loaded with bulk material or packaged goods, right? That was manufactured on the island. But when that goes away, then you don't have as much demand. So it's indirectly out of the, there's very much negative effects of eliminating Section 936 when the federal government did so. That was an indirect impact.
Yeah. Should we go back to 936, or is that like...
we can talk about it.
I mean, the Clinton administration eliminated the Act 936 in 1996 and phased it out over a period of 10 years. Yep. Would Act 60 and 20 and none of these other current incentives even be in place if 936 still was never eliminated in the 90s?
It probably would, because it's very different incentives. And by the way, under the current U.S. tax system, 936 would be irrelevant anyway. So 936, let me see, in a nutshell, basically said, if you have possession-sourced income, you generate that income, it's going to be excluded from your U.S. company's income. And if you leave those retained earnings, those profits in the possession for at least 10 years, a seasoning period, then you could repatriate those earnings at a reduced tax rate. So it eliminated or reduced the repatriation tax. What that did was created thousands of jobs in Puerto Rico and in the USVI. And it also, the banking industry benefited largely because they had so much deposits, right? They had literally billions of dollars from these manufacturing companies. So Clinton comes around, he wants to do some tax cuts, reduce capital gain tax rate in the U.S. And basically he says, I'm going to balance this out by eliminating the exemptions we're giving manufacturing industries in possessions. So basically to give mainlanders a tax break, he said, I'm going to pull this money from there. And the governor we had back then, the first term, 92, Pedro Rosario, he was like, if you kill 936, you're going to kill the economy of the territories.
Told him.
Yeah, he told him. And there's a New York Times article you could pull from 1993 on this, and like he was very, very harsh. Like, this is going to destroy it. But then go for re-election, both of them, 1996. The governor, he went hands down. His resident commissioner sold the idea that we would be looking more like a state if we didn't have the incentive. So there was an indirect benefit. But basically, there was nothing to do. Clinton, he had Congress basically in his favor to repeal these incentives to balance his budget. And he did so in 96. And there wasn't really a 10-year phase out. It was just, as an operation of the law, the 10-year holding period, the 10-year seasoning period was still there. So we talk about a phase out, but it wasn't like they were like, oh, they're so good, right, there's a phase out. It's because that was 1996, that was pre-tax money that was already subject to this regime.
I read that at its height, Section 936 was responsible for 15% of all the jobs on the island directly, and 25% of jobs directly or indirectly.
Those numbers, I don't doubt them, but I think they should be higher.
You think they're even higher than that, really? Okay.
Yeah, I think they should be higher. And the other thing was like a lot of the jobs were well paying. There was a lot of these jobs were like, if you were a factory employee, just line employee, you'd probably be minimum wage or something higher, right? I think we have to be honest about that. But the exec jobs, there was a lot of exec jobs, and those paid very well.
What's your definition of high paying?
Well, if we go based on just minimum wage, right? If you're 3 times that, or at least.
Mm-hmm. Right. At least, right.
Yeah, in the 90s.
In the 90s, right?
Yes.
Like
No, in the 90s, you had people making $60K as a manager or supervisor or something.
Right.
That was.
I remember one of my Uber drivers, I believe she worked for Pfizer.
I think she said Pfizer, yeah.
It was Pfizer. And she was like, man, I had a maid. I had phenomenal, like my income was
had health insurance and
health insurance, pension.
Yeah.
And then when they were finally like laying off or whatever, her severance was for I think over a year, and they paid for her to go to college.
Yeah, no. You saw a lot of that. Yeah, you saw a lot of that. My dad worked for one of these factories when I was growing up, and we'd see like, oh, that's really, really cool. And then I worked for Johnson & Johnson, like I mentioned.
That's right.
And actually, I worked in a sad part because it was during the phase out as things were shutting down, and we were running numbers, but I was seeing like overtime pay, and you'd see hourly employees making, so again, more than 3 times maybe what the average income or under the poverty line would be, so it would be impressive, but that's not coming back, right? So what we have now is these incentives that don't create 1,000 jobs at a time, maybe create 3, 5, 10, but normally are again well-paying jobs. I think if you're poverty line in Puerto Rico is about 18K, right? And if you're making twice as much, those are the average salaries are high 30s for these export service companies, if not higher. Then I think that should be considered a good paying job.
Yeah, but the cost of living is not that low though. That
in Puerto Rico?
In the city. I mean, food is eggs were what was it, like $5.35 for a dozen the other day?
Yeah, but
so it's not that.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were making 40K, it's still going to be pretty tough.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I agree. It's a moving goalpost, definitely. But that's another subject. I had actually one of my clients. So this person is well off economically, and says, this thing has resounded with me. It's like living in Puerto Rico is like playing a video game in hard mode every day.
Wow, I love that.
And I mean, I loved it, but I also like, you're right, because it's just
so true.
Yeah, you're like, oh, you feel like you're gonna change your reality somehow, right? And then there's just things that make it complicated all around. Whether it's bureaucracy or just the that's how we've always done it, or you just things around that just make it difficult, regardless. So that goes back to me saying earlier, these incentives are not going to fix all Puerto Rico's problems, because the budget is so high and we have all these other things going on. But it does help. It's net positive in the economy. It brings additional perspective. It's a form of immersion for us. Ways to do business. Everybody here, the staff, this office, we're always learning from just different people that we're dealing with.
Again, I got another evergreen question for you. What does a blockchain attorney do?
So I have many clients in the space. It maybe evolves based on what's happening in the space. The blockchain space evolves constantly. But to put it simple, people need to reach agreements and put them in paper. So if you're starting a project, if you're doing partnerships with a project, if compensation is going to work in a certain way, if investment into a project is somebody's has a creative manner or new manner, right, to how these tokens are launched or not. And sometimes it's a lot of what we can do is saying, you can't do that. And things that pertain to potentially like banking or securities issues, people will think, I want to do X, Y, Z. And whether we do that work here or we collaborate with other firms to do it, when you're talking about banking or securities issues, it's a lot of times we're just saying no to clients or prospective clients on what they want to do. It's making projects viable.
Yeah. And also keeping up with regulations and things of that nature.
That's absolutely keeping up with regulations and just looking at where things are going or where they might be going. If there was a summons issued, or if there was a cease and desist issued, or if there was some sort of guidance issued, we have to see what it says and what it will indicate towards other things, right? So again, we can tell clients, well, it looks like this is going to be the predominant position or not. Same thing with what's happening with other jurisdictions.
Do you think crypto is going to be significantly more regulated in the next 5 years?
Yes.
Every year, is it get more and more regulated? What
are some of the changes that you've been seeing in regulation?
Yeah, from a regulatory standpoint.
It's going to be more about just definitions. States are looking to take a step ahead and focus on what those definitions will be, and then once you define something, you say what it means, then you can go into how it's regulated or not. Wyoming is trying to take some liberal approaches on defining things and then saying, no, you don't need a money transmitter license, right? But Puerto Rico, on the other hand, Commissioner of Financial Institutions has said, like, you want to operate a Bitcoin ATM, you need a monetary service business registration. So it's going to be around that. And then you'll see federal government. You have Sam from FTX holding hands with Congress and just saying we want regulation, and he's going after like this one unique license, which FTX is probably going to be the first to have and for some time, and that's what they're pushing for.
What is that unique license?
I'm not an expert in all the details, but basically I mentioned it as an example, but they're not the only ones. But there are certain parties looking for a stronger regulation. If I would have to summarize, it would have to go around things like Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering, and just having certain officials and registering who your users are and what movements are. It basically turns you into a bank.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah.
And it's, I don't think you can. And a lot of people in the blockchain space will say that I'm wrong, but I don't think you can avoid regulation coming. It's coming, and there'll be a crackdown. It's coming hard, and the more cases you get of people that abuse somehow, investors or pseudo investors or people that had high hopes. The more you have things like that, the more you're going to have regulators not understand maybe blockchain, but say, well, I don't understand blockchain, but I have constituents that are losing money or whatever and shouldn't be involved in the space. You have things like Celsius and Voyager bankruptcies. Celsius is a company out of New York, New Jersey, where you have the people that will likely lose their deposits, and it ended up in bankruptcy court. So it ends up in the government channels. So the regulators are going to say, well, if you're going to come to me for help anyway, I might as well just step in from the beginning. And I'm not justifying one side or the other, but
I sure hope they find a balance.
There's an expression.
I hate seeing people get scammed.
Yeah.
But then there's also, I also don't want to squash entrepreneurs trying to build something.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, but how they talk about like the nature of the beast. If you're a regulator, you're going to regulate. That's the only thing you're going to do. It's hard to explain where, let me training wheels up until
it's
here,
not like he's just going to
get
a baseball bat. No.
Right. Well, you're
speaking
from experience possibly, because you also used to work in regulation years ago, or you had were you an auditor? Or?
I did.
Were you that guy? Oh God.
No, but I did internal audit and for some time, and then I did a review of funding federal programs. So yeah, I mean, and I mean just tax in general, right? That's what we're dealing with all the time.
Man.
Some of these, going back to that internal audit, like wrote a paper eons ago on like Sarbanes-Oxley and why it was no good, and the conclusion that you would hear is everybody's like, yeah, really, it doesn't solve the problem it was brought upon, right? Sarbanes-Oxley was approved after Enron and Lehman Brothers and Delphia, and these internal controls that you were supposed to review were almost very silly. Like it was something that you could just fix at the time. There was a knee-jerk reaction to something needs to be done because we got this far. Then experts would argue like what these companies were doing was so sophisticated that almost no way to identify it. That's why Arthur Andersen gets exonerated eventually after they no longer existed pretty much. But they got exonerated because like it wasn't their fault as the auditor. So
yeah, they were the big firm that went under after the whole Enron debacle back in
they were the auditor.
Yeah, they're the auditor. Yeah. So we want to respect your time. It's about 4:30, so we certainly appreciate the long interview. I just wanted to ask one more question, and that's just, what do you think? Will Puerto Rico ever become a state, become independent? And what's the status of Puerto Rico statehood?
Yeah. And if so, what happens?
And then,
to these incentives?
if so, what happens with the Act 60 or Act 20 decree holders?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way I could really know if Puerto Rico will ever become a state. There's many things that would have to align, and in modern politics, you'd have to see if those could align. It starts with Congress and presidency, and alongside the Puerto Rican people and their will, based on what we have seen historically. I don't think statehood could just be imposed right now, right? Like it might have been imposed to other territories in the past. So I don't know if it will happen. The incentives would partially go away because we would lose the exclusion on a federal income tax because, again, we'd get that representation. Mm-hmm. But what I would say is it's not an overnight process, the transition into becoming a state. Even all stars align. 100% of Puerto Rico says they want to be a state. And the Congress says, we're going to make you a state. And there's a president that says, I want to be the president who signs this. We're not a state the next day because we'd have to transition from a legal standpoint alone. So think about it, Puerto Rico is its own taxing jurisdiction, right? We'd have to be integrated into the Treasury taxing system. So what does that do to our budget? We're like, no, because we collect 10, 11 million bucks in revenue, in tax revenue every year because we have these high tax brackets, and the IRS is going to say, no, you can't have high tax brackets because now I'm going to take 37% of that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you have roads, and you have just regulations, nature and human, natural resources. You have so many things that have to be integrated that from the point that 100% of Puerto Ricans want to become a state and Congress and president, I think it's a 10-year process.
Yeah.
And that's right, 10 years after all those things would have to align.
Yeah, I'm saying 10 years after everybody is aligned.
And currently no one's aligned on. It's 50-50 is what I
it's roughly 50-50. There's
Very cool. Well, gosh, thank you so much, Giovanni, for joining us today in our little happy hours.
Do you have any parting thoughts, or if not, where are people able to get a hold of you, or what's the best way for people to contact you if they do actually have questions?
Yep. So, they could find, we're on Facebook, Geotax, and geo.tax online. But more than aside from finding me, I should say, if you want to find more information on the acts, there's an organization called L60PR that has the incentives in English and Spanish in what they call rice and beans. So it's like simplified versions of the acts of every incentive, young entrepreneurs, manufacturing, export, service. So somebody that wants to learn more about the incentives themselves and the positive impact of the incentives should check out L60PR. And then again, if you want to find us, www.geo.tax, and we're in Facebook as well as Geotax.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Giovanni, once again, and I hope you'll join us again for another happy hour.
Yeah, we can.
We'll be sure to have IPAs ready for you once again.
We're like, okay, let's talk about one of those subjects, and we could be here for 2 hours. Speaking about just one of the many things.
Yeah, exactly. No, I totally bet. Well, thank you guys for watching. That is it for this episode of El Podcast, the happiest happy hour. Virtual happy hour in the world. And again, once again, if you're not subscribed on YouTube, please subscribe and hit that like. It does help us out in the algorithm. And also, so Jesse and I just recently got engaged, and we were trying out this thing.
Thank you.
Super happy.
And so, so we're not going to get married until we get to 100,000 subscribers. So, yeah. So,
who put that benchmark?
Well, we thought about it seriously just before coming here that we would start saying this on the podcast.
But 100,000? Who thought why is that?
Just, you get your first play button from YouTube.
I was joking around with Kai and I said 1 million, and then she's like, "I like that idea, but let's start with 100,000."
Yeah, okay, 1 million would be like years.
Yeah, so she doesn't want to make it years in the future. I'm fine with either.
I think we can do 100K.
100K.
But what's interesting is that you have to plug it. So it's kind of an experiment because people plug it. It's like, hey, I will leave this island if I get to this many subs, but I will stay on the island until then. And then everyone kind of like, it works. So it's kind of a weird marketing thing that people do. But anyways.
Sounds like you're talking about the law of attraction.
Oh, is that what that is?
I don't know.
But nonetheless, so 100,000 subs is the goal. Love and light to everybody. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode.